Have you ever looked into the eyes of your own children and seen the faces of strangers? I have. It happened on a Tuesday exactly 2 weeks after we buried my Eleanor. It was in that moment, sitting in the unnerving silence of our yellow kitchen, that I understood the full weight of a secret my wife had carried for years. A secret she had prepared me for without my even knowing it. The children called it a family meeting, but it was not a gathering of comfort or shared grief. It was an invasion. A polite, smiling, cold-blooded invasion, and it was the beginning of my war. I did not know it then, but Eleanor had already given me all the weapons I would ever need. The air in the kitchen was thick with the scent of day-old coffee and a silence that felt heavier than any sound. For 43 years, this room had been the heart of our home, a space filled with the aroma of Eleanor's baking and the constant cheerful hum of her presence. Now it was just a room painted a pale, sunny yellow that seemed to mock the cold reality of my new life. I was staring into the black depths of my mug when their car pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching on the gravel with an unwelcome finality. Andre, Brenda, and Denise. My children. They did not knock. The sound of the key turning in the lock, a key I had given them for emergencies, felt like the first turn of a knife. They came in not with hugs or soft words of condolence, but with an air of brisk efficiency, as if they were executives arriving to assess a failing property. My daughter Denise at least had the grace to look uncomfortable, her eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. But my son Andre and his wife Brenda moved with a purpose that chilled me to the bone. There was no inquiry about how I was feeling, no mention of the woman who had been a mother to them and the entire world to me. Brenda especially seemed to see the house not as a home filled with memories, but as a collection of assets waiting to be cataloged. While Andre started talking, her eyes were already scanning the living room. I watched her gaze linger on the mahogany clock Eleanor's father had given us, her expression not one of sentiment, but of calculation. "Dad," Andre began, his voice laced with a false gentleness that set my teeth on edge. "We're here to help. You can't go on living in a big house like this all by yourself. It's just not practical." Brenda glided back into the kitchen, her smile tight and insincere. "We've been looking into some options for you, Elijah," she said, using my first name in a way that always felt like a subtle challenge. "There are some wonderful assisted living communities not too far from our place. They handle everything, the meals, the cleaning, the medication. They spoke of my life as if it were a problem to be solved, a loose end to be tied up. They saw a frail old man lost in his grief who needed to be managed. They did not see the man who had worked 2 jobs to send them to college. They did not see the man who had held their mother's hand through every joy and every sorrow. They saw an obstacle sitting in the middle of a valuable piece of real estate." I remained silent, letting their words hang in the air, each one a small, sharp betrayal. My silence was a language they had never learned to understand. They saw it as weakness, as the confusion of old age. But it was in that silence that I could truly hear them. I heard the greed beneath the feigned concern. I heard the impatience in their carefully chosen words. And most of all, I heard Eleanor's voice, a soft echo in my memory. I remembered the nights she had sat in this very kitchen, her brow furrowed with worry after a visit from them. "They see what we have, Elijah, not who we are," she had once said, her voice barely a whisper. "Be careful." I had dismissed it then, attributing her words to a mother's natural anxiety. How wrong I had been. She had seen the strangers in their eyes long before I did. They continued their presentation, outlining a future for me that I had no part in creating. A future of sterile corridors and scheduled activities, a life downsized and sanitized for their convenience. I just kept my eyes fixed on my coffee cup. It was a simple ceramic mug, one Eleanor had bought at a street fair years ago. My thumb traced the faded pattern of a bluebird on its side. I let them talk until they had exhausted their arguments, until their false sympathy had run its course. When they finally stood to leave, they looked relieved, as if they had successfully completed a difficult but necessary task. Andre placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but felt heavy and possessive. "Just think about it, Dad," he said. "We'll handle all the arrangements." I simply nodded. As I watched them walk back to their car, a new kind of coldness settled over me, one that had nothing to do with grief. It was the cold, hard clarity of truth. When the sound of their engine faded down the street, I stood up from the kitchen table. The weariness of the past 2 weeks fell away, replaced by a slow, burning resolve. I walked into my study, the room where Eleanor had spent so many quiet afternoons. I went to the old oak bookshelf and reached behind a row of classic novels, my fingers finding the familiar shape of a small wooden box. I placed it on the desk. It was a simple cedar box she had kept for decades. With steady hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a single thick manila folder. On the tab in Eleanor's elegant, precise handwriting were 4 simple words: the Portugal Plan. The invasion did not end when they drove away. It simply changed tactics, shifting from a frontal assault to a quiet siege. The phone began to ring with an unnerving regularity. It was always Brenda. Her voice dripped with a synthetic sweetness that failed to mask the sharp metallic glint of her intentions. "Just calling to check in, Elijah." She would begin, her tone light and casual. But the casualness was a lie. Her questions were never about my well-being. They were interrogations disguised as conversation. "I was just thinking," she said one afternoon, "it must be so overwhelming to keep track of all the bills, the property taxes, the insurance, the utilities. If you want, you could just forward them to me. I have a great system for organizing everything. It would be one less thing for you to worry about." She made it sound like an act of kindness, a daughter-in-law's gentle support. But I heard what she was really saying. She wanted access. She wanted control. She wanted to map out the financial territory of my life before she claimed it as her own. 2 days later, Andre called. His approach was different, layered with a performance of filial concern. "Dad, I was talking to Brenda and we were worried. What if you fell? What if something happened and you couldn't get to the phone? We think it's a good idea for us to have a spare key, just in case of an emergency." An emergency of their own making, I thought. They weren't worried about me falling. They were worried about a locked door standing between them and their inheritance. I told him I would think about it, a non-committal answer that I knew would only make them more determined. The pressure was constant, a low hum of expectation in every call, every conversation. They were treating me like a project, a problem whose solution they had already agreed upon. The worst moment came the following Saturday. Brenda had stopped by unannounced, claiming she had been in the neighborhood and wanted to drop off a casserole. Through the kitchen window, I saw her walking through Eleanor's garden. It was fall, and most of the flowers had faded, leaving behind the stark, honest beauty of bare stems and sleeping earth. But Brenda wasn't admiring the garden. She was surveying it. I watched as she paced the length of the rose bushes, her lips moving silently as if she were measuring the space. Her gaze was cold, appraising. She wasn't seeing my wife's sanctuary. She was seeing a patch of land, a feature to be listed in a real estate brochure. A memory flooded my mind so vividly it was like a ghost standing beside me. I saw Eleanor, her hands covered in rich soil, her face shaded by her favorite straw hat. She was on her knees, carefully tending to a new bed of hydrangeas. She looked up at me, her smile as bright as the summer sun, and said, "The earth never lies to you, Elijah. You give it love, you give it care, and it gives you beauty right back. It doesn't have a hidden agenda." The contrast between that warm, loving memory and the cold, calculating woman standing in the garden now was a physical blow. The casserole on my counter felt like a bribe. Brenda's concern felt like a lie. The garden, Eleanor's sacred ground, felt desecrated by her mere presence. The grief I had been holding at bay transformed into a quiet, focused anger. Eleanor was right. The earth doesn't lie, and neither do people's actions. After Brenda left her casserole untouched, I went back to my study. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for Charles, my lawyer, and a friend I had trusted for over 30 years. He picked up on the second ring. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "It's time, Charles," I said, my voice steady. "Activate everything." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then his voice came back firm and reassuring. "I was waiting for your call, Elijah. Consider it done." My next call was to my granddaughter, Jasmine. Hearing her cheerful voice was like a balm on a raw wound. We talked about her classes, about a professor she admired, about the funny antics of her roommate. It was a normal, loving conversation, the kind I had not had with my own children in years. Then, as casually as I could, I asked, "So are your parents planning on coming down to visit me anytime soon?" "Oh, I think so, Grandpa," she said, her innocence a painful reminder of what was at stake. "Mom says they're really worried about you being all alone. She said you and Grandma deserve to rest and not have to worry about so many things anymore." There it was, the narrative they were spinning. They weren't just telling it to me, they were poisoning the well, planting the seeds of my supposed incompetence in the mind of the one person I cherished most. They were not just trying to take my house, they were trying to take my dignity, rewriting the story of my life to fit their selfish plot. I ended the call with Jasmine telling her I loved her and was proud of her. As I put the phone down, the house was silent once more. But this time it was not the silence of grief. It was the quiet before a storm. A storm Eleanor had seen coming, and a storm she had taught me exactly how to navigate. Back in the quiet solitude of my study, the cedar box sat on the desk, feeling heavier than its size would suggest. It held the weight of my wife's love, a love so profound it had reached across the veil of death to protect me. My hands, which had started to tremble with age and anger, were suddenly steady as I opened the folder. The first thing I saw was a stack of pages filled with Eleanor's familiar, elegant script. It was a letter addressed to me. "My dearest Elijah," it began, and just seeing those words felt like she was in the room with me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "If you are reading this," she wrote, "then the time I feared has come. The children have shown their true colors, and I am no longer there to shield you with my presence. Please do not despair. I have not left you alone in this fight. For years I have watched them, and I have prepared. I am not leaving you a burden. I am leaving you a way out. You were always the trusting one, the one who saw only the good in our children. I was the worrier, the one who saw the shadows creeping in at the edges." Her words were a painful confirmation of a truth I had refused to see. She explained that her suspicions had taken root years ago on her 60th birthday. I remembered that day well. We had thrown a small party and I had saved for months to buy her a beautiful diamond ring, a replacement for the one she had lost when she was young. Andre and Brenda had been the last to leave. The next morning the ring was gone from the little dish on her dresser where she always kept it. Brenda had helped her search for it, her face a mask of sympathy. She suggested that perhaps in her old age Eleanor had misplaced it. A week later, Brenda was wearing a new diamond necklace that was suspiciously similar in size and quality. When Eleanor had gently questioned her, Brenda had flown into a rage, accusing my wife of having a failing memory and of making cruel accusations. Andre had stood by his wife, telling his own mother to apologize. For the sake of peace, Eleanor had. But she had never forgotten. The letter detailed other instances, small cuts that had accumulated over the years. The times Andre had called not to talk, but to ask for a loan he never intended to repay. The way Brenda would walk through our home, her lips pursed in disapproval, making comments about the outdated furniture or the old-fashioned kitchen. "This house is too much work for you two," she would say, her words disguised as concern, but dripping with condescension. They had viewed my 35 years with the Postal Service not as a source of pride, a life of honest hard work that had provided for them, but as something vaguely embarrassing, a blue-collar job that didn't fit with the lavish image they were trying to build for themselves. Eleanor wrote, "I saw the way they looked at our home, Elijah, not as the place where they grew up, where every scratch on the floorboards tells a story, but as an asset, a commodity. And I saw how they looked at you, not as their father, but as the gatekeeper to that asset. I knew that the moment I was gone, they would descend. They would use your grief as a tool, your goodness as a weapon against you. They would try to make you feel old, incompetent, and helpless. Do not believe them. You are the strongest man I have ever known." My eyes blurred with tears as I read the next lines. She had been fighting a secret battle on my behalf all along. "So I began to make my own plans," she continued. "Plans to protect you, to protect our home, to protect the legacy of the life we built together. This folder contains everything you need." I turned the page, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a copy of a bank statement showing a final mortgage payment made over 5 years ago. I had no idea. She had been managing our finances, and she had quietly used an inheritance from her aunt to pay off the house without ever telling me. Following that was another document, a deed. My fingers traced the official seal. The property, our home on Cypress Hill, was registered in one name and one name only: Elijah Coleman. She had legally removed her own name and therefore any claim her heirs might have through her. "The house is yours, my love," the letter concluded. "Legally, completely, and indisputably yours. This is the first wall of our fortress. They have no legal right to it. They cannot force you to sell. They cannot evict you from your own home. This is your ground to stand on. Do not let them take it from you. This is only the beginning. Read on, your loving wife, Eleanor. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the folder. The grief in my heart was now mingled with a fierce, burning gratitude. My wife had not just been my partner in life. She was my guardian, my protector even now. The strangers had come to claim my kingdom, not knowing that my queen had already fortified the walls long ago. My wife's letter was a shield, but the next item in the folder was a sword. It was a small, leather-bound notebook, the kind she used to keep her addresses and important dates in. But when I opened it, I saw it was something else entirely. The first page was titled, Friends of the Fortress. It was a list of names, and next to each name, Eleanor had written a short, precise note. The first name on the list was Charles Evans, our lawyer. Her note read, Charles is more than a lawyer. He is a friend. Remember when his practice almost went under after his partner left? We gave him the loan that kept his doors open. He never forgot. He owes us a debt of loyalty, not money. He will stand with you. The memory came back instantly. It was 15 years ago. Charles had come over for dinner, his face etched with worry. I had thought we were just helping a friend in a tough spot. I never imagined Eleanor saw it as building an alliance, forging a bond of loyalty that I would one day need to call upon. She had a foresight that bordered on prophecy. She saw the chessboard of our lives in 3 dimensions, while I only ever saw the next move. The second name on the list was Anna Santos. Anna had cleaned our house for over a decade, but she was more than an employee. She was family. She had come to this country with nothing, working tirelessly to build a life for her daughter. Eleanor's note next to her name was detailed. Anna is the soul of this house. She sees everything. When her daughter Sophia won a scholarship to the state university, it only covered tuition. Anna was working 3 jobs to pay for her books and board. We set up a private fund to cover all of Sophia's expenses for 4 years. Anna thinks it was an anonymous donation from our church. She never knew it was us. Her loyalty is to this family's heart, not its wallet. She will be your eyes and ears. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silent room. I remembered the day Eleanor had suggested the anonymous donation. She had framed it as a simple act of charity. That girl is so bright, Elijah, she had said. It would be a sin to let money stand in the way of her future. I had agreed without a second thought, proud of my wife's generous spirit. But now I saw the intricate layers of her planning. It was not just generosity. It was strategic kindness. She was investing in people, building a bulwark of gratitude and affection around us. She knew that in the battle to come, I would need more than legal documents. I would need human witnesses. I would need allies who were bound to me not by blood, but by the unbreakable ties of genuine kindness. My children were bound by blood, and they were the very ones trying to bleed me dry. Eleanor had built an army for me, an army of goodwill. She had seen the coming war and had recruited her soldiers with acts of quiet compassion. I felt a profound sense of humility. I had lived beside this brilliant, strategic woman for nearly half a century and had only ever seen the surface of her strength. She was not just the heart of our family. She was its spine, its shield, and its strategist. With a newfound sense of purpose, I picked up the phone and dialed Anna's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Mr. Coleman, how are you feeling? I have been so worried." "I'm getting by, Anna. Thank you for asking," I said. "But I need to ask you something important. It's about Eleanor." There was a soft sigh on the other end. "I know," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She told me to watch over you. She said that after she was gone, your children might change." I was stunned into silence. "She spoke to you about this?" "Yes, sir. About a year ago. She made me promise. She said, 'Anna, this house has been good to you, and you have been good to it. When I am gone, Elijah will need a friend who has clear eyes.' She worried they would try to say you were not well, that you could not manage on your own. She made me promise to be a witness to your strength, to tell the truth if anyone asked. She said, 'His goodness can sometimes be a weakness, Anna. He will need people to remind him how to fight.'" Every word Anna spoke was another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Eleanor had not just prepared documents. She had prepared people. She had anticipated their every move, their every lie, and she had put a truth teller in place to counter them. "Thank you, Anna," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." I may need you to be that witness soon." "I am here, Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "Anything you need, for you, for Mrs. Eleanor. She gave my Sophia a future. I will help you protect yours." We spoke for a few more minutes, and she told me about Brenda's visit, confirming she had seen her pacing the garden like a developer. When I hung up the phone, the room no longer felt empty. It felt full. It was filled with the presence of my wife, with the strength of her love, and with the unwavering loyalty of the allies she had gathered to my side. The fortress she had built was stronger than I ever could have imagined. Its walls were not just made of deeds and trusts. They were built with the unbreakable mortar of human decency. If Eleanor's letter was the foundation of my defense and the notebook of allies was my line of support, the next document in the folder was the fortress itself. It was a thick, professionally bound portfolio, its cover embossed with formal, serious lettering. The Cypress Hill Irrevocable Conservation Trust. I ran my fingers over the words. Irrevocable. The word felt as solid and unmovable as the stone fireplace in the living room. Unbreakable. Unchangeable. Even I could not undo what she had set in motion. This was not a suggestion. It was a decree. I opened the document, and my lack of legal expertise was no barrier to understanding the simple, brutal elegance of Eleanor's plan. The language was dense, full of clauses and subsections, but its purpose was crystal clear. The trust was designed to do one thing: preserve our home, not just as a building, but as a legacy. It stated that the property at 128 Cypress Hill could never be sold. It could not be mortgaged, subdivided, or commercially developed. It was to remain a single-family residence. Its garden protected its structure, maintained for generations to come. It was a legal shield forged in a lawyer's office, but conceived in a wife's loving and protective heart. It was a direct countermeasure to Brenda's vision of a real estate listing and Andre's dream of liquidating his past for a quick profit. I slowly turned the pages, scanning the legal text until I reached the section titled Beneficiary Designation. My heart hammered in my chest. I expected to see a complicated arrangement, perhaps splitting the interest between the children with conditions. I braced myself for the complexity of it all. But the language was startlingly simple. Upon my passing, the trust, and therefore the house and all its contents, would pass in its entirety to a sole beneficiary. My eyes scanned the line, and I had to read it twice to make sure I was not mistaken. The name printed there was not Andre, it was not Denise, it was Jasmine Coleman, my granddaughter. And then immediately following that clause was another written in language so stark and unambiguous it felt like a locked door. It was titled Clause of Exclusion. I read the words aloud to the empty room, my voice low and steady. Under no circumstances shall Andre Coleman or Brenda Coleman be permitted to reside and profit from or hold any legal or financial interest in the property or assets contained within this trust. This exclusion is permanent and absolute. Absolute. There was no room for appeal, no loophole for a clever lawyer to exploit. Eleanor had not just disarmed them, she had banished them from the kingdom. She had surgically removed their greed from the future of our home. Tucked into the back of the document, I found another small folded note in Eleanor's handwriting. This one was different from the first. It was not a call to arms, but an explanation. It was the why. She must have known how harsh this would seem, and she wanted me to understand the love behind her seemingly ruthless decision. My love, the note began. I know this looks severe, but you must understand. This is not punishment. This is protection. We have seen Jasmine's heart. She gets her hands dirty in the garden. She listens to your old stories with genuine fascination. She sees this house as a home, not a bank account. She has our soul, Elijah. She will know what to do. Giving this house to Andre and Brenda would not be a gift. It would be a curse. It would be like handing a bottle of whiskey to an alcoholic. It would only feed the sickness that has taken root in their hearts. They would fight over the money until there was nothing left. Not the money, not the house, and not their relationship. They would erase our 43 years of memories for 1 year of living beyond their means. In a way, I am protecting them from their own worst impulses. She was right. The money from the house would have been a fleeting pleasure gone in a flash of new cars and expensive vacations, leaving them with nothing but the ashes of their own avarice. Our legacy isn't in the value of this property, Eleanor's note concluded. It is in the values we tried to instill. Values of hard work, respect, and family. Jasmine understands that. She is the true heir to our life, not because of her name, but because of her character. Trust her. Trust the plan. Trust the love that built these walls. I closed the folder, the weight of it all settling over me. This was the master stroke. It was an act of profound love, not just for me and Jasmine, but in its own painful way for the very children it excluded. It was the decision of a parent who sometimes has to make a hard choice for the ultimate good of her children, even if they would never understand it. I now held the final piece of the puzzle. I had the deed, the allies, and the unshakable trust. The siege could continue, but the fortress was impregnable. My queen had left me fully armed for the battle ahead. All that was left was to wait for them to make the next move. Just when I thought the folder had revealed all of its secrets, my fingers brushed against one last thin portfolio tucked into the very back lining. It was different from the others, which were filled with legal documents and handwritten notes. This one was sleek and professional. I slid it out. My curiosity piqued. Inside, there were no legal clauses or financial statements. Instead, the first page was a glossy, high-resolution photograph of a small, whitewashed villa. It had a terracotta roof, bright blue shutters, and a cascade of brilliant pink bougainvillea spilling over a stone wall. The sky behind it was a shade of blue so deep it seemed almost unreal. I turned the page. More photos. A sun-drenched terrace overlooking the ocean. A simple, airy living room with a fireplace. A small garden with a lemon tree. It was a place of peace, a place of warmth and light. I felt a strange sense of longing, a pull towards this place I had never seen. Then I found the accompanying documents. It was a deed of ownership with one copy in Portuguese and a certified translation in English. The property, a 2-bedroom villa in the Algarve region of Portugal, was owned by a corporation with a generic name, Atlantic Sun Holdings. Tucked behind the deed was one more folded note from Eleanor. My dearest Aude, it began, "This is our final secret. This is our escape hatch. I used the money my aunt left me, the money that was mine alone, to buy this place for us. It is in a company's name for privacy, but the company is ours. The children know nothing of my inheritance, and so they know nothing of this. I always dreamed we would grow old there together watching the sunset over the ocean. Life had other plans. So now, it is for you. It is a place where you can go to be Elijah, not just a father or a widower, but the man I fell in love with. A place to be free." The name Algarve on the deed sparked a memory distant and sun-drenched. Our 25th anniversary trip. It was the only time we had ever been to Europe. We had spent a week in Portugal, and Eleanor had fallen deeply in love with it. I remembered her standing on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, the wind whipping through her hair, her face turned towards the sun. She looked younger, more carefree than I had seen her in years. She turned to me, her eyes brighter than the sparkling water below, and said something I had never forgotten. "The air here tastes of freedom, Elijah." I had smiled taking her hand, thinking it was just the romance of the vacation speaking. I thought it was poetry. I was a fool. It was not poetry. It was a promise. She was not just enjoying a view, she was scouting a location. That entire trip, which I had cherished as a beautiful shared memory, was also a meticulously planned reconnaissance mission. She was searching for a sanctuary, a place beyond the reach of our children's growing entitlement. My hands were shaking as I looked at the final items in the portfolio. There were 2 open-ended first-class airline tickets to Faro, Portugal. 2 tickets. A pang of my old grief hit me. She had bought one for herself, a trip she would now never take. But then I looked closer. The tickets were valid for 5 years. She had bought them long after her diagnosis. She knew she would not be using hers. The second ticket was not for her. It was for me to give to someone else. It was for Jasmine. She had thought of everything, of everyone. Beneath the tickets was a single crisp business card. It was for an international moving company specializing in overseas relocations. On the back, Eleanor had written, "They have a full inventory of our most important belongings. Everything is already packed in your mind, my love. Just make the call." I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The full, breathtaking scope of her love washed over me. This was not a plan born of anger or revenge. It was a masterpiece of devotion. She had spent the last years of her life not succumbing to her illness, but quietly building an ark for me, an ark to carry me away from the coming flood of my own children's greed. She had provided the vessel, the destination, the supplies, and even a companion for the journey. Tears welled in my eyes, but for the first time in weeks, they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of profound, staggering awe for the woman I had been lucky enough to call my wife. She had not left me. She had simply gone ahead to prepare the way. I carefully placed every document back into the cedar box, closing the lid with a soft final click. The weight of the world seemed to lift from my shoulders. I was not a victim. I was not a helpless old man waiting for his children to decide his fate. I was the keeper of Eleanor's legacy, the executor of her final, brilliant plan. My queen had not just built me a fortress to withstand a siege. She had built me an escape route to a new kingdom, and I, her humble king, was finally ready to walk it. A week of tense silence passed, a quiet that felt more like a held breath than a moment of peace. Then they returned. This time it was not a casual visit. It was a formal delegation. I saw them pull up from the living room window, Andre's car followed by Denise's. They did not come alone. A third man emerged from Andre's passenger seat, a stranger in a well-tailored but slightly too shiny suit. He carried a leather briefcase and walked with the self-important air of a man who believed his time was very valuable. I opened the door before they had a chance to knock. I would meet this on my feet, not as a victim in my own home, but as its master. They filed into the living room, the atmosphere instantly heavy with unspoken intentions. Brenda was the clear leader, her posture rigid, her face set in a look of grim determination. Andre stood a half step behind her, his eyes avoiding mine, a silent and willing accomplice. The man in the suit stood beside them, his smile a thin, rehearsed line. And then there was Denise. My daughter looked smaller than I had ever seen her, her shoulders hunched, her gaze fixed on the pattern of the Persian rug Eleanor and I had bought in a street market 30 years ago. She was a ghost at her own family's execution, present in body but absent in spirit. Her shame was a visible shroud, and it was the only thing in the room that felt honest. "Dad," Andre began, breaking the silence. "This is Mr. Hayes. He's a financial advisor. He's here to help us navigate this transition, Mr." Hayes stepped forward and offered me a hand. His grip was firm but cold. "A pleasure, Mr. Coleman," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your children are simply trying to ensure your future is secure and worry-free." I did not respond. I simply nodded and gestured for them to sit on the sofa opposite my armchair. I remained standing. Brenda, impatient with the pleasantries, took control. She placed her large purse on the coffee table with a decisive thud and pulled out a thick bound document, placing it directly in front of me. The cover was stark white with bold black letters that read, "The Coleman Family Estate Proposal." "Let's not waste any time, Elijah," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "We have a solution, a proposal that benefits everyone. We've had the house appraised, and we already have a potential buyer, a very motivated one." She slid the document across the table towards me. "Here is our offer. You agree to sell the house. The proceeds will be divided into 3 equal shares for Andre, Denise, and myself. From our shares, we will collectively fund your residence at the Willows, which is a premium care facility, the best in the state. You'll have round-the-clock care, meals, activities, everything you need. It is the most logical and compassionate solution. It's what's best for everyone." Her words were like perfectly polished stone, smooth and hard and cold. She spoke of selling my home, of dividing my life's work, of placing me in an institution, all with the detached efficiency of a corporate CEO discussing a quarterly report. The air crackled with the audacity of it all. I looked at Denise. A single tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, but I had seen it. Before I could speak, Mr. Hayes leaned forward, a look of patronizing sympathy on his face. "Mr. Coleman," he began, his voice taking on a soft, condescending tone. "It is completely understandable for this to be emotional. But at this stage of life, managing a large asset like this property can be an immense burden. There are taxes, upkeep, unexpected repairs. Our goal is to simplify, to alleviate that stress. We often see that a certain level of cognitive decline can make financial management challenging. This proposal isn't about taking anything away from you. It's about protecting you from the complexities that can become overwhelming for seniors." His words were a calculated insult wrapped in the language of care. Cognitive decline, burden, overwhelming. He was painting a picture of me as a doddering old fool, incapable of managing his own affairs, a man who needed to be saved from himself. And my children, my own flesh and blood, sat there and nodded in agreement. Andre looked at me, his expression pleading, as if asking me to just accept my own erasure for his convenience. Brenda's eyes were like steel, daring me to object, and Denise just stared at the floor, drowning in her complicity. I let the silence stretch out a long, uncomfortable moment that made even Mr. Hayes shift in his seat. I looked at each of them in turn. I looked at the proposal, this document that represented the final transactional value of their love for me. It was all there in black and white: the price of my home, the cost of my care, the neat and tidy sum they would each receive for disposing of their father. They had done the math. They had calculated the profit. They had turned a lifetime of memories into a balance sheet, and now they were waiting for my signature. I picked up the glossy proposal from the table, but I did not open it. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of their betrayal in my hands. Then I looked directly at Andre, then at Brenda, and finally let my gaze settle on the smug face of Mr. Hayes. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the room with the force of a gavel. It was a single solid syllable of refusal, a word they were not prepared to hear. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "No. What do you mean, no? This is a generous offer, Elijah. It's the only sensible option." "My answer is no." I repeated, my voice calm and even. "This is my home. You will not sell it. I will not be relocated. This discussion is over." Mr. Hayes's smooth facade cracked. The practiced smile vanished, replaced by a look of sharp irritation. He leaned forward again, his voice losing its gentle, patronizing edge and taking on a harder, more threatening tone. "Mr. Coleman," he said slowly, as if speaking to a difficult child, "perhaps you misunderstand the gravity of your situation. Your children have a legal and moral obligation to ensure your well-being. If you are unwilling to cooperate, if you insist on making decisions that are clearly not in your own best interest, then we will be forced to explore other avenues." He paused for effect, letting the threat hang in the air. "We will be forced to petition the court for legal guardianship. We will present evidence of your confusion, your inability to manage your affairs. A judge will appoint a conservator to make these decisions for you. That conservator will almost certainly be your son, and he will approve this sale. Do you understand what I am saying? Either you agree to this proposal, or the decision will be taken out of your hands entirely." This was it, the final brutal move, the ultimate act of disrespect. They were threatening to strip me of my rights, to legally declare me incompetent, to turn me into a ward of the son I had raised. They were threatening to erase me as a person. I saw a flicker of triumph in Brenda's eyes. She believed they had me cornered. Andre stared at his hands, a willing participant in his father's legal execution. Denise finally looked up at me, her face pale with horror, finally understanding the monstrous path they were on. I held their gazes for a long moment, letting the silence magnify the ugliness of their threat. Then I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply placed a small silver digital voice recorder on the coffee table. It was no bigger than my thumb. For a moment, they all just stared at it, confused. Then, with a deliberate and steady hand, I pressed the play button. My own voice, quiet and firm, echoed in the tense silence. "No." Brenda's sharp, impatient voice followed. "No. What do you mean, no?" Then came the smooth, condescending voice of Mr. Hayes. "We often see that a certain level of cognitive decline can make financial management challenging." The color drained from the lawyer's face. His eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in pure, unadulterated panic. Brenda's jaw went slack. Andre looked as if he had been struck by lightning. I let the recording continue, a perfect, undeniable transcript of their entire predatory performance. And then came the final, damning words from Mr. Hayes, his voice now sounding sinister and cruel in the playback. "We will be forced to petition the court for legal guardianship. The decision will be taken out of your hands entirely." I pressed the stop button. The silence that followed was absolute, a ringing, deafening void. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had reversed with the force of an explosion. They had come to my home to declare me incompetent, and I had, with the press of a single button, proven that I was 10 steps ahead of them. I had documented their conspiracy, their coercion, their threat to abuse the legal system for financial gain. Mr. Hayes was the first to break. He shot to his feet, his face a mask of pale, sweaty fear. He began shoving papers into his briefcase with trembling hands, his professional composure completely shattered. "This meeting is over," he stammered, not looking at me, not looking at anyone. "My involvement in this matter is concluded." He practically ran from the room, fumbling with the latch on the front door before yanking it open and disappearing without another word. He knew what that recording meant. It was not just evidence. It was professional ruin. Brenda and Andre were frozen statues of shock and disbelief. They stared at the small silver device on the table as if it were a venomous snake. They had walked into my house believing they held all the cards that my age and my grief had made me a weak and easy target. They had underestimated me. But more than that, they had underestimated my wife. Eleanor had known this day would come, and she had armed me with more than just documents. She had armed me with her foresight, her wisdom, and her unwavering belief in my strength. And today I had finally proven myself worthy of her trust. The slam of the front door echoed in a silence that was now thick with their ruin. Mr. Hayes was gone, but his clients, my children, remained. They were still frozen, staring at the small silver recorder on the coffee table as if it held the power to strike them down. The air of smug superiority they had entered with had evaporated, replaced by the pale, clammy sheen of fear. The hunter had become the hunted, and they were trapped in my living room with the full consequences of their actions. They had come to dismantle my life, but they had only succeeded in dismantling their own lies. I let them sit in their self-made prison of silence for a long moment. Then I turned without a word and walked into my study. I heard Brenda whisper my name, a questioning, fearful sound, but I ignored her. I opened the cedar box and retrieved the first 2 folders. When I returned to the living room, I held their future in my hands. I walked to the coffee table, and I did not place the first folder down gently. I dropped it. The slap of cardboard on the polished wood was as loud as a gunshot in the still room. "Eleanor knew," I said, and my voice was no longer the quiet, weary tone of a grieving husband. It was cold steel. It was the voice of a man in complete control. Andre and Brenda both flinched. "She saw this day coming years ago. She saw the greed in your hearts long before I was willing to admit it was there." I tapped the folder with my finger. "You come into my home with your lawyers and your proposals talking about appraisals and market value as if you have any right to do so. You have no rights here." I leaned forward, looking from my son's terrified face to my daughter-in-law's stunned expression. "This house belongs to me, and me alone." I slid the deed across the table. "Eleanor had it paid off and put solely in my name 5 years ago. Your names are nowhere on it. You are guests in my home and your visit is over." Brenda stared at the document, her mind visibly struggling to process the information. "That's not possible," she stammered. "We would have known." "You only know what you think you are entitled to," I shot back. "You never bothered to know the truth." Before she could argue further, I dropped the second, much thicker document on top of the first. The thump was heavy final. "And even if you could somehow find a way around that, there is this." I opened the portfolio to the first page, showing the bold title of the irrevocable trust. "This house will never be sold. Not by you, not by me, not by anyone. It is protected permanently." I saw a flicker of desperate hope in Andre's eyes, the look of a man thinking he might still salvage something from the wreckage. "Protected for who?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I let my gaze settle on him and I delivered the killing blow. "The sole beneficiary of this trust upon my death is Jasmine." The sound that escaped Brenda's lips was not a human sound of pain or surprise. It was the raw animal shriek of a predator whose kill had just been stolen from its jaws. It was a sound of pure, thwarted avarice. "No!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "No, you can't do that. We are your children." "And this," I continued, my voice cutting through her hysteria as I flipped a page to the exclusion clause, "is the part that mentions you. It states, and I quote, 'Under no circumstances shall Andre Coleman or Brenda Coleman be permitted to reside in profit from or hold any legal or financial interest in this property.' It is permanent. It is absolute. You are, for all legal intents and purposes, disinherited from this home forever." Andre simply wilted. He slumped back into the sofa cushions as if his bones had turned to dust. All the air went out of him. But my final move was not a document. It was a truth, and it was aimed directly at Brenda. I locked my eyes on hers. "Jasmine's tuition. I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. Did you really think the university was just handing out full scholarships? Did you think the money for her books, her meal plan, her housing was just appearing out of thin air? Brenda's face went from rage to confusion, then to dawning, sickening horror. For 2 years, I said every single semester has been paid for by my pension, by me. I did it because I love my granddaughter, and because I knew her own parents were too selfish to ever give her that opportunity. I let you lie to her. I let her thank you. You smiled and accepted her gratitude for a gift you never gave. I stood up towering over them. You stood here today trying to steal the very home that was funding your own daughter's future, all while taking the credit for my love. There was nothing left for them to say. The lies were gone. The threats were empty. The carefully constructed facade of the caring children had been burned to the ground. All that remained in the room was the ugly, naked truth of who they were and the unbreakable strength of the woman who had seen them coming all along. With the truth laid bare and their lies reduced to ashes, there was nothing left for them to do but endure the consequences. Andre sat slumped on the sofa, a man hollowed out by his own weakness. Brenda was rigid with a silent, impotent fury, her face a pale mask of hatred. She had lost, and she knew it. But the final act of this family tragedy was yet to come. I did not raise my voice again. I did not need to. With a calm that felt absolute, I walked to the heavy oak front door and pulled it wide open. The cool afternoon air filled the room. Parked at the curb directly in front of my house was a large moving truck. Its engine was idling with a low, patient rumble, and 2 men in matching blue uniforms were leaning against the cab, waiting. For a moment, my children just stared their minds, unable to comprehend this new development. They had come with a plan to move me out, and they were met with a scene that suggested an entirely different kind of relocation. I turned back to them, my gaze sweeping past their shocked faces to a corner of the living room that had been obscured by the angle of their seating. In that corner, stacked nearly to the ceiling, was a mountain of dusty, sealed cardboard boxes. They had been there for so long they had become part of the furniture, a silent monument to my children's casual entitlement. You see those boxes? I asked, my voice even. That is your past. Andre, your old law school textbooks are in there, the ones you swore you would come back for. Brenda, that's the china set from your wedding that you never had space for in your own house. Denise, your high school yearbooks and all the trophies you ever won are in there. For 20 years, this house has been more than your father's home. It has been your free storage unit, a place to dump the parts of your life you no longer wanted to look at, but were not willing to let go of. You treated my home like a dusty attic. I let the words sink in. Then I delivered my final ultimatum. I pointed a steady finger towards the open door and the waiting truck. Those 2 men outside work for me. They were hired to empty that corner, but I have decided to give that honor to you. I looked at each of them, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. That is all of your junk that you have stored here for the last 20 years. I am giving you 10 minutes to get every single box out of my house and into your cars. If it is not gone in 10 minutes, my men will throw it all on the curb for the trash collectors. Take it all, and then never come back. For a second, Brenda looked like she was going to explode with rage, to scream, to refuse. But then her eyes flickered towards the window. Mrs. Henderson from next door was suddenly tending to her prize-winning roses, her attention clearly fixed on the drama unfolding on my porch. Across the street, Mr. Gable had his head under the hood of his perfectly functional car, his ears almost certainly pointed in our direction. The threat of public humiliation was a weapon more powerful than any legal document. Defeated, Brenda shot to her feet, her face contorted with a vicious snarl. She grabbed the nearest box, grunting with the effort, and stormed out the door. Andre, a puppet whose strings had been cut, slowly rose and followed her example, his shoulders stooped in utter disgrace. They worked in a frantic, furious silence, hauling the heavy, forgotten pieces of their lives out of my home. Each box was an accusation. Each trip to their cars was a walk of shame performed for the benefit of the entire neighborhood. Through it all, Denise did not move. She stood by the fireplace, tears streaming down her face, making no effort to stop them. She did not help her brother. She just watched her expression, one of profound, soul-deep regret. When Andre and Brenda had thrown the last box into the trunk of their car, Brenda shot me a look of pure venom before getting in and slamming the door. Andre didn't look at me at all. As their car sped away, Denise finally walked towards me, her steps hesitant. She stopped in the doorway, her voice a choked whisper. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she said, the words torn from her. "I'm so sorry." I looked at my daughter, the one who had stood by and watched, and for the first time I saw a flicker of the little girl she used to be. I did not offer forgiveness. It was not mine to give so easily. I simply gave a single slow nod. It was enough. She turned and walked into her own car, her head bowed. I stood on the porch and watched until she was gone. The street was quiet again. The neighbors had disappeared back into their homes, their curiosity satisfied. I turned and walked back into my house, my home. The corner where the boxes had stood for 2 decades was now empty clean. The room felt bigger, lighter. I closed the heavy oak door, and the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The expulsion was complete. The house was mine again, and for the first time since Eleanor had gone, it finally felt like home. The silence that filled my house after they were gone was not empty. It was clean. It was the quiet of a fever that had finally broken. The first and hardest task still lay ahead of me. I had to tell Jasmine. Making that phone call was one of the most difficult things I have ever had to do. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of her world to destroy the image she had of the parents she loved. I sat in my study for a long time, the phone in my hand, rehearsing the words that I knew would break her heart. When I finally dialed, her voice was a bright, cheerful sound that made my task even harder. "Grandpa, I was just thinking about you." I took a deep breath. "Jasmine, honey." I began, my voice heavy. "There is something I have to tell you. Something about the house. And about your tuition." Gently and with as much love as I could muster, I walked her through the entire ugly story. I told her about her parents' proposal, the lawyer, the threat of guardianship, and the little silver recorder. I told her about her grandmother's secret plan, about the trust that bore her name, and about the tuition payments I had been making for 2 years. Her end of the line was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and broken. "They lied to me, Grandpa," she whispered, and I could hear the shattering of her innocence in that single sentence. There were tears, a storm of them. She cried for the lies, for the betrayal, for the ugliness of it all. I just listened, letting her pour out her pain and confusion. But beneath the hurt, I could hear something else taking shape, resolve. The same steel I had heard in Eleanor's voice was present in her granddaughter's. "I'm coming home, Grandpa," she said, her voice suddenly clear and strong. "I'm booking the first flight I can get. You are not going to be alone in that house for one more night." Eleanor had trusted her instincts about Jasmine, and in that moment, I saw that trust rewarded 1,000 times over. The fallout for Andre and Brenda was swift and catastrophic. I heard about it from Anna, who had heard it from the neighborhood grapevine, which was buzzing with the story of the public expulsion. Their partnership, I realized, had never been based on love. It was a business arrangement fueled by shared ambition and a bottomless well of greed, with the grand prize of my house now permanently out of reach. The foundation of their marriage crumbled. The arguments were apparently explosive, a firestorm of blame and recrimination. She blamed him for his weakness, for not being able to control his own father. He blamed her for her arrogance, for pushing too hard and exposing their plan. Their shared dream of a life funded by my legacy had been their only real bond. Without it, they were just two bitter, angry people choking on the ashes of their own thwarted desires. 6 months later, I received a sterile formal notice in the mail. They had filed for divorce. Then there was Denise. She called me the next day. Her voice was thick with shame, almost unrecognizable through her sobs. It was a rambling, incoherent apology, a torrent of regret for her silence, for her weakness, for her complicity in the plan to strip me of my home and my dignity. I listened without interruption. When she was finished, a long silence stretched between us. She was waiting for me to say it was okay to offer absolution to make it better. But forgiveness is not a switch you can flip. It is a slow, difficult journey, and it has to be earned. "Denise," I said finally, my voice tired but not unkind. "I hear you. But words are easy. Right now, they are just words." I paused. "Time will tell," I said. "Let time and your actions show me if you are truly sorry." It was not the forgiveness she wanted, but it was the truth she needed. To her credit, she accepted it. She started calling me every day. Sometimes we barely spoke. Other times she would just talk about her day, a tentative, fragile effort to rebuild a connection from the ground up. A few weeks into our new, uncertain relationship, she told me she had started seeing a therapist. "I need to understand why I was so weak," she had said, "why I stood by and let that happen." That was the first moment I felt a flicker of hope. She was not just apologizing for her actions, she was trying to fix the part of herself that had allowed them to happen. Our conversations were like building a fragile bridge across a vast canyon, one painful, hesitant plank at a time. I still did not know if we could ever cross to the other side, but for the first time I saw that she was willing to do the work. 3 months later, Jasmine and I boarded a plane. As the aircraft climbed through the clouds, leaving the familiar coastline of America behind, I felt a profound sense of release. A shedding of a weight I had not fully realized I was carrying. It was the weight of a long, silent battle, the weight of disappointment, the weight of a home that had become a fortress instead of a sanctuary. Jasmine, sitting beside me, was not looking back. She was looking forward, a map of our new home spread open on her lap, her expression bright with the promise of adventure. She was not running from a broken family, she was running towards a new life. Our arrival in the Algarve was like stepping into a painting. The air was soft and smelled of salt and blooming flowers. The sun felt like a benediction on my old skin. When the taxi pulled up to the whitewashed villa with its bright blue shutters, it was exactly as the photograph had depicted, only more real, more alive. We stood before it for a moment, two travelers at the end of a long and difficult road. This was not just a house, it was Eleanor's final promise, a testament to a love that had planned for a future it would never see. As I unlocked the door, it swung open, not into a house, but into a feeling, the feeling of peace. The rooms were simple, filled with light, and from the terrace, the deep, impossible blue of the Atlantic stretched out to the horizon. It was the view Eleanor had seen, the one that tasted of freedom. We had come home. We spent the first few days exploring our new life. We walked along the cliffs, ate fresh seafood in small cafes, and talked for hours. Really talked in a way we never had before. I told her stories about her grandmother she had never heard, and she told me about her dreams for the future. She had decided to change her major. She wanted to study international law to help people navigate the complex systems of immigration. She wanted to help families find their own safe harbors. My wife had saved one girl, and in doing so had set in motion a wave of compassion that would touch countless others. One afternoon while I was reading on the terrace, Jasmine came to me, her hands smudged with dirt and her eyes sparkling with an idea. "Grandpa, come see what I found," she said, leading me around the side of the villa. There, tucked away in a corner, was a small, walled garden. It was completely overgrown, a tangle of weeds and neglected rose bushes, a sad, forgotten space. But beneath the chaos, I could see the good bones of what had once been a beautiful garden. A stone bench sat half hidden by ivy, and a small dry fountain stood in the center. Jasmine looked at the wild, untamed space, not with dismay, but with vision. "It's a mess," she said with a smile. "But it's a beautiful mess. Grandma Eleanor would have loved this." She knelt down and gently pulled a stubborn weed from the base of a rose bush. "What do you say, Grandpa?" she asked, looking up at me, her face full of earnest hope. "Let's bring it back to life, together. Let's make it our garden, just like Grandma Eleanor would have." And in that moment, watching my granddaughter with her hands in the soil, ready to nurture a forgotten space back to life, I understood everything. Eleanor's true legacy was not the house on Cypress Hill. It was not this villa in Portugal. Her legacy was here in this brilliant, compassionate, and resilient young woman. She had passed her spirit on the spirit of a creator, not a taker. I sat on the old stone bench as Jasmine began to work her movements, full of a youthful energy that seemed to infuse the very air around her. I watched the sun begin its slow descent towards the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The war was over. I had not lost a son and a daughter. I had been liberated from the prison of their expectations. I had not lost a house. I had gained the world. Eleanor's final masterful move had not just been to save me. It had been to set Jasmine free. Free from the toxic legacy of her parents, free to become the person she was always meant to be. My queen had saved us both, and as I sat there in the warmth of the Portuguese evening, a quiet, profound peace settled into my bones, a peace I had not felt in years. I was finally home. A true legacy is not what you leave for your family, but what you leave inside them. It's the courage to build their own path, not the entitlement to walk on one you paved. The greatest inheritance is the wisdom to know when to let go.